Thank you, Dan, for that, and thank you for reminding people just how old I am, because you can see that it's a long, long time since I did any high jumping whatsoever. Can I just say it is a pleasure genuinely to be here, and thank Dan and all those volunteers who organised tonight. We had a great time out just before we came here at the station, leafleting with the leaflet, which is all about your local hospital, which I think a lot of people took, and then presumably when they were sitting on the train or whatever would be reading it and discovering that it was actually about the EU. But it is so important that as has been, as Royston actually said, this is the moment. This is what many, many of us have been waiting for so long. And we have a once, I hate the expression, but once in a generation opportunity to really get the message across that this is the time to leave the EU. And I am very, very pleased that we are working with Vote Leave and then the other campaign, Leave EU, that everybody at some stage will all come together. We're all working hard on a cross-party basis because it's so important. We will not win this, as Dan has said, without people from all over the country, all over the United Kingdom, who have different political views and all getting out to vote on the day. Now, I just want to try and explain a little bit about the Labour Leave campaign and why there is a very distinguished and indeed historical reason for people on the left. And I'm not going to ask how many people here see themselves on the left, but there is a very good economic, political, social reason why anyone on the left should actually want to leave the EU. Vote Leave, Labour Leave, which we have now set up, is a small, perfectly formed, very well organised group with a small number of MPs at the moment, but I have to say growing week by week, because the Labour Party has not had a debate on the EU forever since it was started. Once we go back looking to the history, when we originally joined back in 1973, the Common Market, the organisation that we then voted to remain in 1975 was actually campaigned against by very, very senior members of the Labour Party, people who we all will know the names of, people like Gateskill, Foote, Tony Benn, Barbara Castle, really solid Labour figures who felt then that there was something totally undemocratic about the EU, or the Common Market as it was then. When it was first created, it was actually the left right across Europe who opposed it most. And Tony Benn said when it was first started, he called it a coup d'etat by a political class who did not believe in popular sovereignty. And I believe that 40 years on, it's that very same political class, an establishment of a word which will be used more and more, but is actually a word that sums up very, very well the kind of people who are forcing and want to see an ever closer union. An establishment of the elites in the 27 other countries who now dominate the EU. I think that it was a clear objective then of those architects of the Common Market to diminish over time the role of democratic governments and hand over real power to the private corporate world. And we're seeing that today with the TTIP negotiations with the United States, where quite honestly, how anyone in the Labour Party or on the left many of them will say they're opposed to TTIP because they think that it could end up with leading to privatisation and leading to not so much the privatisation, but the feeling that our parliament will be even less involved in decisions and that democratic governments will be completely overruled, and that the private sector would actually, private companies would have actual powers over elected governments. So I really can't understand why anyone in the Labour Party who is opposing TTIP doesn't see the logic extension of that actually the EU is what the real enemy is when it comes to that area. Now, I'm very, I like Europe, as lots of people say. I get very cross when people refer to the European Union as Europe. We want to come out of Europe. Very clever that the Stay In campaign have got their title, Britain Stronger in Europe. well, you know, the idea that we're going to be pulled away from Europe, that we're no longer going to be part of Europe. But it's a very clever dodge. They want to use the word Europe all the time rather than the EU. And of course, the EU represents a very small part of the whole of the European continent. So, and I want to see, as I hope everyone here would want to see, the end to that artificial bureaucratic organisation and actually having a situation where we can trade and work with and cooperate with other countries the way that we can do at the moment with countries outside the EU. And, you know, I know Dan will go into the whole economic argument a great deal more than I would, but, you know, it really is important that we remember that when we joined with 9 members, they had 36%, represented 36% of the world's economy. Today, with their 28 members, it's 17% and it's falling. So those people who say, you know, this EU is this hugely important, amazing organisation that's bringing together 28 countries, actually it is a shrinking market. It's downgrading all the time, forgetting what's going on at the moment with those countries in the Eurozone and the way some of those countries have been treated. It is a failing organisation, and why a country like ours would want to stay part of it, I just do not understand. Now, I said about the left-wing case, and you know, there are a lot of, when I've done debates with some of my colleagues, and I have to say the trade unions now are beginning to get organised on this. The trade unions for a long time, again, had a very pro-EU position. Their attitude was that, you know, because of what the Thatcher government had done in terms of trade union rights and social rights, and that there was a sort of social Europe, which really was what we wanted to be part of. And of course, what we've seen over and over again now, that all those benefits that people on the left would say we got in terms of trade union rights and various work institutions, which have meant that we've been able to, you know, have a very, very good situation for people at work. That is now beginning to erode. But also the idea that if we were to leave the EU, suddenly those laws wouldn't exist. They're enshrined, most of those, in our own law. So we wouldn't suddenly lose rights that are there and have been built up. And it would have to be a new government who would want to take them away. But, you know, if we look at the actions of the EU, and particularly the European Court of Justice, then I think that anyone will see that there's actually day by day very big hammer blows being made to workers and workers' rights here in the United Kingdom. All the talk about zero-hour contracts, those were promoted under the EU flexible labour market rules. Collective bargaining has been attacked time after time, particularly now in Greece, in parts in Ireland, in Portugal, as well as part of the EU bailout conditions. So, you know, the EU didn't shrink from attacking workers when it was in their interest to do so. You will all, or some of you will know about the Viking Lane case in the European Court of Justice, which threatens to impose lower wages than the UK minimum wage, allowing companies using a headquarters address of convenience somewhere in Poland or Romania to use their minimum wage and to reduce the minimum wage here in the UK. And of course, the free movement of labour rules, the free movement of labour rules are actually exploiting workers, and that's why we're seeing so many of unscrupulous employers bringing in cheap labour and forcing down UK wage rates. So all the things that my new leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has said that he wants to do, like take back, which I think actually would get a lot of support amongst many Conservative voters, take back some of the railways in this country and privatise rail facilities. A number of these issues will not be able to be done under EU rules. And so the idea that we will be better off by staying in terms of all the social Europe, as it's talked about, is just wrong. And I think that message is getting crossed, because that's why so many trade unionists now are beginning to get involved at local level. Some of them are more quiet than others. Some of them are not quite raising their heads above the parapet yet, but it is growing. And I'm absolutely certain that by the time we get into those few months before we have the referendum, then they will be men in their thousands with us, and that the leaderships of some of those trade unions will have come over to be calling for a vote to leave. My own opposition to the UK's membership isn't a xenophobic, and that's what we get accused of all the time. And I doubt if there's any xenophobics in this room. And I'm not. I certainly, coming from Northern Ireland, cannot be accused of being a little Englander. But it is because I genuinely believe that the EU isn't working, that it can't ever work for ordinary people. And if it can't actually work for ordinary people, one of the reasons it can't is because there's absolutely no democratic control. And to be clear, there is absolutely no law that we have got no law that the European Union has brought down through directives and so on that we could not have done as our own government. And that is what I want to see happen again. The position at the moment, of course, is that we are being told that the Prime Minister is negotiating. He's negotiating when I remember watching it live on television. I happened to be still at home that morning when the Prime Minister made his speech about wanting fundamental reform, fundamental reforms to the EU. And I remember genuinely feeling, wow, that is great. You know, we really are going to have now a Prime Minister, a Conservative government pushing for fundamental reform. That is going to make a huge difference. And I have genuinely, because I did give him the benefit of the doubt, I've genuinely been disappointed that what he actually asked for is just so minimum. No mention of the fisheries policy, which has destroyed our fishing. No mention of agriculture, the largest amount of money that goes into farming. And you know, when you have, and so some of you may well be farmers or friends of farmers, I mean, if people say, well, we wouldn't get our subsidy, well, the money we would get back, we decide how it's spent. And I'm absolutely certain, because I come from a farming background, I'm absolutely certain that if we had control of that money, our farmers would get a much better deal and not have the bureaucratic nonsense that has made my poor mother, who's now got one cow left, have to fill in so many forms and bureaucracy that you'd think we were running a 5,000-acre estate. And it's that kind of thing that we need to get across to the public. That it is control means we decide how that money is spent. We decide what are the priorities for our country. So I don't want to tell the Belgians or the Irish or any of the other EU countries how to run their country and how to negotiate. And I don't want them negotiating for us. And I don't like the idea that somebody who sits on the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is not from our country, is negotiating on behalf of all of us, 28 countries, and that we have no real say in that. I don't like the fact that the person responsible, and I particularly don't like it for the fact, coming from Northern Ireland, that the perfect person responsible for all the rural responsibilities is a Fianna Gael, former Fianna Gael minister. And it is just wrong that we, as a proud country, as a country with the fifth largest economy, a big military power, probably the fifth in the world, being members of the G7, the G20, we're one of those 5 permanent, really important roles in the United Nations. And as many people have said, more people in the world speak English. We have English is the most spoken language in the world. So we really don't need the EU. And our message has to be that we can do so much better out of the EU. We can do so much more for democracy that would give us an emancipation and a freedom that would actually, I believe, revigorate politics again in this country, because most people believe that Parliament now is practically useless when it comes to legislation, and that we are very much a sieve for everything that's happened in the EU. So as far as I'm concerned, we will be doing our bit in the Labour Party to try and get the party to move away from that kind of automatic situation where nothing has been able to be provoked or talked about what's wrong with the EU. We tried first to call ourselves Labour in Britain, Mind you, I don't like the word Britain because that excludes Northern Ireland. That's why I always refer to the UK. But we decided in the end to go straight for Labour leave, because we weren't finding that people were actually coming up in the Labour Party of what they wanted to reform. They all said, well, we want reform in the EU, but they wouldn't actually say what they really wanted, because deep down, most of our shadow cabinet, not our shadow cabinet actually, slightly different what's going on in the shadow cabinet at the moment, most of our, what I would call our Labour leader establishment, who've been around for a long time, have an attitude that it doesn't matter what's negotiated. It doesn't matter how little David Cameron gets, or if he gets absolutely nothing, the country's best interest is staying in. Well, that is being rejected now by more and more of our members. So I'm confident that we will get changes, and we are going to have to make sure that we get out there around the country working with all the other political parties. And, I think, again, it's going to be terrific. Just at the station there tonight, I met UKIP members, Conservative members. I met people who'd been in UKIP, people who'd been in the Conservative Party, people who'd been in the Labour Party. It is absolutely a brilliant opportunity for all the political parties at the grassroots level. And that's where I think we're going to win this. We're not going to win it by just using Twitter and just using the social media and just using even the newspapers. We're going to win it by hearts and minds out there in the country, and that's what we've got to do. And all of you here who want to leave the EU, there may be only a short time, we may have a year, we may have less. You have to do your bit as much as possible, because don't think that the effort you put in and the time you spend will not make a difference. It really will. And I do believe, just ending, that it's time for democratic governments across the EU to reclaim that power back from Brussels and begin to represent the real interests of their people. And we here in this country can lead the way. I love my country. I love the United Kingdom. I have confidence in our ability to be a self-governing nation again. And this referendum gives us that chance, and we must not let it pass. So let's make it happen, and let us rejoin the rest of the world. Thank you.